Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Luis Ortega from Aero Intervention and from PCR Online. And today we have the pleasure to host Professor Michael Haude from Neuss, Germany. He is a former past president of APCI and a well-known researcher in the field of bioabsorbable devices. And yesterday in the EuroPCR 2023 meeting, he presented like a late-breaking clinical trial, the one-year results of the BIOMAG-1 study, studying a new generation of McMurray devices. Professor Haude, many thanks for having us, for having time for Aero Intervention. And I would like you to ask if you can resume, you can make a summary of the trial for us.
Yeah, Luz, thank you very much for that. Actually, the BIOMAG-1 trial is a first-in-human trial that evaluates the latest version of the drug-eluting bioresorbable magnesium scaffold, which is called DREAMS-3G. DREAMS-3G, of course, has predecessors. And what is different with DREAMS-3G in relation to the predecessor? First of all, the backbone has a different alloy, mostly composed of magnesium, but it's a different alloy. And what is different with that alloy? It allows for a longer radial strength over time than its predecessor, while on the other side, it keeps the resorption time of 12 months. That is the one important thing. The second thing is strut thickness has been reduced down to 99 micrometer for the 2.5 millimeter version, down to 117 micrometer for the 3.0 and 3.5 version. And now for the large version, the 4.0 version, it was kept on the 147 micrometer version. The third improvement was that although this is a metallic device, it's not radiopacked. So you don't see it under fluoroscopy or CNET. So you need to have markers, radiopacked markers, to identify proximal and distal end. And there, a new marker concept has been introduced, which now easily allows you to identify the proximal and distal end, even without imaging enhancement technologies. And finally, in comparison to its predecessor, we have a larger size portfolio, ranging in diameter from 2.5 to 4.0, and in lengths from 1322 up to 30 millimeter. So this is the background of improvements and changes. And the trial was conducted primarily to show that with these new devices, in particular with the prolonged scaffolding time, we can reduce the late lumen loss, the in-scaffold late lumen loss. This was the parameter that was not at its best with the predecessor versions. The clinical outcome with the predecessor was always fine, in particular, absolutely no rate of probable or definite scaffold thrombosis. Now, BIOMAG-1 evaluation at 1 year, so means at the end of the resorption time, showed us that we significantly reduced the in-scaffold late lumen loss by 38% down to 0.24 millimeter. And when we look at the clinical outcome, target lesion failure rate in 116 patients was 2.6%. All events were clinically driven target lesion revascularizations, no death, no myocardial infarction, and no definite or probable scaffold thrombosis. Now, with having said that, we have now an environment for that particular device that is competitive to modern drug-eluting stents. And now have achieved this, we can move forward with the next step to move into a prospective randomized trial to compare this resorbable device against a standard contemporary drug-eluting stent. So this is roughly the summary of what we have presented and where we are today.
That's very nice, very impressive data. I actually was able to follow the presentation yesterday through the online platform from EuroPCR. And one of the, I will say, things that has caught my attention from McMurray always has been this extremely low thrombogenicity that it shows the magnesium. I think it's a very interesting material for for bioprosthesis, for coronary bioprosthesis in this case. And actually, that paper was published also in Aero Intervention, so that's nice. I remember that in the presentation you showed the 3 cases of TLR that there were 2 cases in which clearly the vessel sizes were not optimal for the inclusion criteria. And one of the third case where there was no like a clear, explanation from the TLR. My question will be something that pops to my mind. Do you any imaging during the TLR during the revascularization that can show anything else besides the angio?
Actually, the trial had a mandatory intercoronary imaging, both IVUS and OCT, during the index procedure at 6 months and at 12 months. This imaging, in particular the intercoronary imaging, was not in favor of guiding our procedure rather than getting information about the resorption process. But on the other side, it allows us to get, of course, information on how well the implantation procedure was done. The implantation procedure in general should have followed the 4P strategy, means a classical patient selection, pre-dilatation, then adequate sizing of the device, and post-dilatation. And what I can say today, because we are in particular analyzing this, that pre-dilatation, which was mandatory, as well as post-dilatation, which was mandatory, was done in 100% of the patients, which is on a much higher level that was achieved in comparison to previous trials with the predecessor devices. So these particular 3 failure cases, it was very obvious that in 2 of the cases, there were several misregardings of the 4Ps. In particular, vessel size that was selected according to reference vessel diameter was by far too small. This is always the mistake that we are doing when we are sending these devices into too small arteries. We know that from VVS, we know that from other scaffolds. This is always a bad signal. On the other side, there was one case where we saw from the intercoronary imaging that it was a very rigid fibrotic lesion, and lesion preparation in this demanding scenario was not performed at its best. And therefore, the scaffold was implanted at a time when the vessel was not adequately prepared for it. So these were the contributing aspects which we were able to analyze. On the other side, this one single case which we had where almost everything was okay, no disregarding of any kind of parameter related to the 4Ps. This developed, nevertheless, a clinically driven restenosis that required re-intervention. But one, honestly speaking, is acceptable.
Yes, I mean, it's within the margins of the current drug-eluting stents. No? All devices have failures. I mean, and that's something we have to bear in mind. I have something that also get my attention is I remember with polymeric devices there was this kind of long-term assessment description that within the scaffold segment there could be an atherosclerotic process. The reasons for that was not clear. Was more like an observational finding. I don't know if with mathematics, with this the device, you have that experience or you have this data. If in the long term there could be, neoatherosclerotic the development within the scaffold segment.
Now we can look at that topic in 2 views. One, according to the preclinical data that we have available, and the other one, which we have available from the clinical trials with the predecessor devices. I think one important thing is here that must be regarded. We have an absorption time of 12 months. When we look at the PLLA-based scaffolds, they do have resorption times of 3 years and longer. Now, after 12 months with us, we have a setup to 0. And after 3 years with the PLLA-based. So what the PLLA-based have seen is an continuously ongoing increase of events over time. When we look at the data that we have, both for preclinical data as well as for the data coming from McMaris in particular in the large registry is now being observed over 4 years, is that we have a clear flattening of the curve after the 1 year time point, means after the completion of the resorption. That raises the hope in the device that we really can have a better outcome on the long-term run with this kind of resorbable strategy versus a continuous implant of a permanent drug-eluting stent.
That's very interesting. My last question, I'm always curious about the future. So you comment on that the sponsor of the investigators were thinking on going to an RCT. I know that that could be very preliminary, things that maybe cannot be disclosed, but what information can you give us to us of the future plans that the investigator have for this device?
So again, as I mentioned, the next step has to be a large randomized clinical trial comparing the DREAMS-3G against a contemporary drug-eluting stent, showing that the device is non-inferior to the drug-eluting stent. It will be a trial that will enroll around 2,000 patients. It's intended to let it run worldwide. So a real big endeavor that we have to undertake. At the end, we're going to see this trial will be the important one that is going to show whether the absorbable technology at all with this particular device that has its advantages over other resorbable technologies will really let the whole story of a resorbable device survive over time. So I'm very confident that the sponsor is aware of that. We are moving that forward. It will be a trial that will be done in around 100 centers worldwide. So a really large, big thing. The hope that I personally have is being one of the primary investigators is really that the participants stick to the rules, that they stick to the 4P rules, which will be encountered in that trial, and not to repeat the mistakes I have to say, because I was also participating, have in particular done with the BVS in the BVS trials, which then led to the failure of that device.
Okay, that's great because it's a big responsibility, I have to say, for investigators and the sponsor, and also something that I think that differs from drug-eluting stents with BRS is that it's a device trial, but it's actually also kind of a procedure, trial, no, in which also you have to take into account the variability of the implantation technique. So it's not only the device, it's also the procedure itself. So a lot of variables in the equation that has to be adjusted, no? I really appreciate your time, your insights, Professor Haude. It has been a pleasure for us. We have been following the McMurray's devices for years. We have a lot of these papers in our intervention. We're very happy about that. Very happy also to remark that this was a simultaneous publication, so you can go to the Air Intervention website and take a look to the full manuscript. We have very important thoughts, very impressive figures with all the intravascular imaging, IVUS, OCT, and I will invite all the people to go into the website and take a look to it. Professor Haude, again, thank you for your time.
Luis, thank you very much. And in particular, we are very grateful that your intervention accepted our paper and made it possible to get simultaneously published yesterday with the presentation in the late-breaking clinical trial session here at EuroPCR 2023. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.